We hear all the time about these huge, ambitious climate goals that get set on the world stage. But the real work, the really hard part, is figuring out how to turn those big promises into actual, tangible action for our planet's forests. So today, we're going to dive into the critical toolkit that makes that happen.
And let's be clear, the stakes are incredibly high. These forests are one of our absolute best allies in the fight against climate change. They're these massive carbon sinks. The Paris Agreement itself points out that getting to a balance between emissions and removals is the whole game, and that means we have to protect these ecosystems. This is way bigger than just trees. It's about keeping our whole climate system stable.
So that brings us right to the heart of the matter, the big question for this whole explainer. How do you actually bridge that gap? The gap between a global agreement signed in some fancy conference hall and the everyday decisions that determine whether a forest gets cut down or conserved.
Well, the answer lies in a framework of really targeted, really strategic interventions. In the world of REDD+, we call them policies and measures, or just PAMs for short. The best way to think of them is like a practical toolkit, all the specific strategies and tactics a country can pull from to protect its forests.
So here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll define exactly what PAMs are. Then we'll look at how they target the root causes of deforestation. We're also going to explore why you can't just use them one by one. They have to work together. And finally, we'll get into how you measure success and actually get people on board.
All right, so first things first, what exactly are we talking about when we say policies and measures?
Okay, so the official definition under the UNFCCC is that PAMs are basically the actions that governments take to hit certain goals. And for REDD+, that goal is pretty specific. Cut emissions from deforestation and boost the amount of carbon that forests can store. What's really crucial here is that these aren't just good ideas, they are the official mechanism for making REDD+ happen on the ground.
And when you look at this list, you really get a sense of just how diverse this PAMs toolkit is. It's not just about passing a single law and calling it a day. No way. We're talking about everything from big legal reforms to on-the-ground technical assistance, financial incentives, investments in things like monitoring tech, and even building up the skills of local communities. It's a truly comprehensive approach because, honestly, it's a super complex problem.
And you absolutely need that diverse toolkit, because the key is that PAMs have to be tailored to the specific causes, or what we call drivers, of deforestation. It's like medicine, right? You have to diagnose the problem before you can prescribe the solution.
So the very first step is understanding that there are two types of drivers. You've got your direct drivers. These are the immediate physical things causing forest loss. Think clearing land for farms, logging, building a new road. But behind all of that, you have the indirect drivers. And this is the really tricky stuff. The complex web of social, economic, and even political forces that are causing those direct actions to happen in the first place. Things like commodity prices or weak governance.
And this distinction perfectly explains why we have different types of PAMs. Direct PAMs are designed to tackle those immediate drivers head-on. A reforestation project, a fire prevention program, those are direct PAMs. But then you have enabling PAMs. These go after those deeper, indirect drivers. We're talking about things like clarifying who owns the land or reforming government policies. These actions create the stable foundation you need for the direct stuff to actually work and stick around.
Now, this is super important because these different interventions, well, they don't work in isolation. You have to combine them into what's called a coherent package of PAMs.
Right, so the key takeaway here is that a truly effective strategy doesn't just pick one tool from the toolbox. It's about strategically combining multiple PAMs, both direct and enabling, into one single coherent package. The whole point of this package is to tackle a priority direct driver and its underlying indirect drivers all at the same time. That's how you get a much more powerful and much more lasting impact.
Let's make this a little more concrete. Okay, imagine the direct driver you're fighting is deforestation from expanding palm oil plantations. A smart package of PAMs might look something like this. You'd start with an enabling PAM, like actually enforcing your land use regulations. Then you'd add some technical assistance to help farmers use more sustainable practices. You'd couple that with a direct incentive, maybe some financial support, but only if they follow the rules. And finally, you'd invest in the field to boost monitoring and make sure the whole system is actually working. You see how each piece supports the others? It's a system.
But of course, designing one of these packages is a really complex balancing act. As this diagram kind of shows, decision makers are juggling a whole bunch of factors. What's actually politically possible? How much will it cost? And where's the money coming from? Do we even have the technical skills to pull this off? And hey, what about all the other benefits beyond just carbon, like protecting biodiversity or helping out local communities?
So that brings us to our last big piece.
Once you've designed and rolled out your package of PAMs, how in the world do you know if it's working? And maybe just as important, how do you get people to actually participate?
Let's just be totally clear. At the end of the day, the fundamental goal of any REDD+ program is to generate measurable results. We're talking about real, quantifiable reductions in greenhouse gas emissions or increases in carbon removals, all measured against a baseline that you've already established. It really is all about the numbers.
But that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? You can't just go stick a carbon meter in the middle of a forest and get a simple number. Tracking this kind of progress across huge, complex landscapes is incredibly difficult. So, how do people actually do it?
Well, the answer is by using what are called proxy indicators. These are basically practical, on-the-ground metrics that act as a stand-in for measuring greenhouse gases directly. So, for that reforestation PAM, you'd track the survival rate of the saplings you planted. For fire prevention, you'd measure the area of land that didn't burn. You might even track things like how many convictions there were for forest crimes to measure governance. These proxies give you a real, tangible way to see if your PAMs are having an effect.
But look, even the most brilliantly designed PAMs will fall flat if people aren't motivated to change what they're doing. And that's where incentives come into play. Incentives are the tools you use to encourage everyone, from a smallholder farmer to a giant corporation, to actually participate and follow the rules.
And just like with PAMs, incentives come in a couple of different flavors. Direct incentives are exactly what they sound like, a direct reward for an action you've already taken. Think a cash payment for protecting a forest. Policy and governance incentives, on the other hand, are more like investments to make future action possible. For example, by clarifying a community's legal rights to their land, you give them the security and the motivation they need to manage it sustainably for the long haul.
Ultimately, every single thing we've talked about today comes back to this one core idea. Whether you're designing policies, choosing indicators, or figuring out incentives, you always have to keep this fundamental, results-based objective in mind. Every single action has to tie back to that goal of generating measurable climate results.
Which kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We know what PAMs are, and we know how they're supposed to work in a perfect world. But out here in the real world, what do you think is the single biggest barrier to making them work? Is it the money, just securing long-term funding? Is it the technical challenge, building up the skills on the ground? Or is it that monumental task of getting and keeping the political will to see it through? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.